Hello and welcome to Bibliophilia. I'm Becca Chavez, and today we're discussing Their Eyes Were Watching God.
So if you want to hear a white guy and a Latina talk about one of the great works of African American literature, stick around. Is that obnoxious?
Yeah.
All right. So, it's true, though.
And they can hear you, so.
I know.
Oh, okay. So, welcome to Bibliophilia. I'm Becca Chavez, and I'm here with Scott. Scott, it has been a while.
It has been a while.
4 whole episodes.
4 whole episodes that I've been AWOL, and I apologize for that. But
what have you been doing?
I have been working on the sequel to my novel, The Cruelty, and once again, it is quite a pain in the butt to actually finish a novel. But I'm plowing along. I have Gwendolyn heading off to Switzerland and then Dubai, so it's going to be a great little adventure.
Awesome.
Stay tuned. Yeah.
So that book is available on Amazon?
Yeah,
and
The Cruelty is available
things?
on Amazon. It's available at Tattered Cover, Barnes & Noble,
Okay.
whatever. Just go in and ask for it.
I have a question
Yes.
about that, because Tattered Cover has this cool machine where you can print a book on demand.
Yeah.
Is that what happens if I go in and ask for your book?
No, they'll see if it's on the shelves, which it probably isn't. But then they can order it and send it right to your house.
But they won't print it there for
They
me.
would not instantly, no. Sorry.
Lame.
I know.
I did watch them print once, and then the machine broke, and then the lady was on the phone, and I was trying to get her attention, the machines.
It seems
not
pretty
really
unwieldy,
working.
the machine, yeah.
Yeah.
So we're here with producer Gabe again. Hi, Gabe.
Hi.
Hi.
Gabe had to turn on his mic. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. Just,
Okay.
Relaxing.
I'm going to be reading a lot this show, but
Okay.
not books.
Okay. That's fine.
So yeah, Their Eyes Were Watching God.
Their eyes were
This
watching God.
is one hell of a novel, I gotta say.
Yeah, it's it's a really amazing novel. Do you want to do a 2-minute plot now that we do?
No, I don't want to do the 2-minute plot. It's fresher in your mind, but I have to say that. So this is one of my top 2 or 3 novels of all time, and when I read it in high school as part of an English class, I instantly, from page 1, absolutely fell in love with it. And it's actually the book that inspired me to be a writer. Now, I write cheap thrillers. I do not write literary fiction. That said, the writing is so luminous that alone really can, I think, win you over, and you can keep going through the entire novel just based on how fantastic the writing is. And the plot is great too, the characters are wonderful, but the writing is gorgeous.
Okay, let's tell people about the plot. So I'll do the 2-minute.
Okay.
I'll do 2 minutes
You'll do the 2
for the
minutes.
plot.
So I'm gonna ask Siri to start the timer. Siri, start a 2-minute timer, please.
She's probably not even listening. She doesn't even care.
She's listening. She's just not even answering.
Yeah,
now.
see, that's her
All right.
problem. So just start
It's fine.
do it
Just
analog.
all right.
I guess.
I'm gonna count in my head. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000. All right, ready?
All right, I'm
All right,
ready. Okay, so Their Eyes Were Watching God tells the story of Janie, basically from the time that she's a child through her adulthood, when she's just coming back from a trial in Florida where she was tried for murder. Janie, as a young girl, hangs out. Her grandmother works on a plantation, and Janie lives there, and she hangs out with other children. But then it becomes clear that she's different, which is that she's Black, and her grandmother makes it very clear to her that this is a thing that makes her different. And Janie is sent off by the grandmother to marry this old guy who she's not very into. And while she's living with the old guy, she meets this other guy walking down the street. She runs off with him, and he becomes the mayor of this town, and he's very successful, and that success kind of comes to her as well in a way. Like she gets to live off the success, the fruit of his success, and that's very good for her. But she's lost her voice. He never really lets her talk and never really talks to her.
Right. She's quite a passive partner.
Yeah,
in that
and
relationship.
he dies, which is unfortunate for him, but he was pretty old, so we're not going to dwell on it too much. And she meets this guy, Tea Cake, who's much younger than her, and really finds love for the first time in her life. And she runs off with Tea Cake. She leaves all this wealth that she's accumulated behind and runs off with Tea Cake to the Everglades. And when they're in the Everglades, a hurricane comes, during which the titular scene shows up because when the hurricane comes, they're preparing and their eyes are watching God to see what was going to happen. And the hurricane just kind of wipes everything out. Tea Cake, they're living in a shelter, and Tea Cake goes off to do some government work, and while he's government cleanup, and while he's doing this, he's bit by a rabid dog, and he's rabid. There's really no solution, and he starts attacking Janie, and she shoots him. And he dies, so that's why she's on trial for murder. And she does end up getting off and going back to the town that she lived as the mayor's wife in.
And she still has her inheritance.
And she still has her inheritance.
Right. So
no asset forfeiture in the day.
Is it a happy ending? Can we call it a happy ending?
I think Janie's happy with her ending.
Oh, I think so too.
And I won't even say that that's her ending, too. I won't.
Oh,
I mean,
right.
there's more to her story, but this is the end of this story in her life.
Exactly. And interestingly enough, it's precisely her happiness that makes this novel actually quite controversial for its day and its context, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's so the novel was written by Zora Neale Hurston in the 1930s, I believe.
Yeah, 1937.
So it's a very difficult time. For those who don't know, there was this thing called the Great Depression. If you've been living under a rock for the past 10 years when they've been discussing
Jim Crow laws. Also, no picnic.
It's really not a lot of fun. So it's a really difficult time in the United States, but it's a really interesting time in American literature because the Harlem Renaissance is happening.
Exactly. It is, I would say, one of the most. It's one of the most interesting times in American literature. Period. And it's also one of the most interesting times. It was, of course, as the name would imply, centered around Harlem in Manhattan. And as it happens, Zora Neale Hurston arrived there as a student at Barnard College, which is part of Columbia University, and she was the only black student in the school at the time. And so she arrived in 1925, so right at the heart, the zenith of the Harlem Renaissance, and she became friends with, Langston Hughes, James Baldwin, and Ralph Ellison, all the rest of the great writers of the Harlem Renaissance.
Yeah, and it was just they were creating something that was completely different because the sounds. I mean, they were explaining an experience that I don't think a lot of people in the United States really understood. Right. And the other writers who were coming up at this time, there was the Lost Generation, and they were just hanging out in Paris with Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Stein, those guys. At the same time, Steinbeck was developing his craft. Faulkner was getting ready to hit the scene. I think he was 50s more so than 30s. But Steinbeck definitely is based in the 1930s. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of stuff happening in the United States. It's really exciting. You're looking at this peak of everything's really, really good in the 20s, and then it all falls apart in the 30s. And it kind of created a lot of artists in a very interesting way. And Zora Neale Hurston was one of those artists.
So interestingly, the Harlem Renaissance was a cultural movement that, of course, arose.
Where was it based?
In Racine, Wisconsin. Of course. So the Harlem Renaissance really is a stand-in for a phenomenon that was going on across the United States, where you had African-American communities in every large city sort of coming together and forming sort of an intellectual vanguard. And it had really started, of course, at the end of slavery, but only started becoming recognized in the late 19-teens, 18, 19, somewhere in there. And there was a debate from very early on whether or not this was a way of telling the rest of America, that is to say white America, who African Americans truly were, or was it something for themselves, a way to develop art within their community, literature, theater, dance, music. And very early on, the Harlem Renaissance developed into a lot of fractions, a lot of different factions. We see that people like Wright would sort of veer off and become very polemical, whereas Zora Neale Hurston was decidedly not that, was she?
No. And she was a different time. She predated him a little bit, I'd say. Wright was post World War II.
That's where he became prominent, but he was
Yeah.
highly critical of her work. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the novel, and then we can talk about kind of how her relationship with the other writers of the time affected
Absolutely.
how the novel was accepted and how it was
Viewed in the culture.
yeah, and something interesting that happened to the novel that we'll talk about later. Something
Right.
very interesting that happened to the novel. All right, so I mean, when we look at Janie as a character, Zora Neale Hurston was an anthropologist, which I think is an interesting
Right.
element of writing, because I know that because writers who come from a different background, when you're not steeped in this idea of like the literature as a thing, and you
Right.
don't, you're more anthropology is about the study of people, and so I think when you, I think that's something that kind of plays a part in this.
Sure, she wasn't coming from an MFA program. By any
No.
means. So she approached it somewhat scientifically, where, I mean, obviously anthropology was at its very early inchoate stages at this point. But, when she was studying at Columbia, one of her colleagues at the school was Margaret Mead, actually. And she went off, Zora Neale Hurston went off to the South. She would later go to Haiti, Jamaica, Honduras, a couple of other countries, to do field work in ethnography, studying folklore. But she concentrated most of her effort really on the American South and the Black experience in the American South. And she wrote about this quite extensively. She has a great body of nonfiction work out there, in addition to her novels and a few plays. But yeah, she was fascinated by the life of African Americans in the South.
And I think the one thing that's really interesting about the story is that right away she sets Janie up not really as an African American. She sets Janie up just as a young woman a young girl living in the South, and Janie doesn't really talk to a lot of other Black people. It's not like
Right.
it's not something that's prominent for her. It's something that happens. I mean, she grows up basically on a plantation, I guess, like what used to be a plantation with a great house, and she just plays with the children that are there that live in the house. And then one day someone comes by and takes a picture of them and gives it to them, and Janie's like, well, I don't see myself. I don't know why she didn't have any mirrors anywhere, but she was like, she doesn't see herself, and someone's like, that's you, you're the Black one. And she
Right.
and this is kind of like,
And she's very surprised at that. She didn't
yeah.
realize that.
and Zora Neale Hurston, the way it's portrayed in the book, that's very much when Zora Neale Hurston stops talking about Janie's childhood.
Absolutely.
Like
Yeah.
that's it. And then Janie, she stops talking about the other children too. Janie kind of goes off on her own to experience her adolescence and growing into an adult.
Right. So can I talk real quick about the theme of independence and individual independence?
Sure.
So it's very interesting because this is a theme that's presented very early on in the book, and Janie's grandmother, who's just called Nanny, is the one who raises her, and she tells her this story when Janie's already a teenager, and she tells her the story of how she came to be in this world. Mm-hmm. And Nanny had always had these great hopes for herself of being free, but she was born a slave, and she was raped by the slave owner, and had Janie's mother, Leafy, right in the closing days of the Civil War. And the slave owner's wife discovered that her husband had been the father of this baby, Leafy, and said that she was going to have Nanny whipped with 100 lashes, which was enough to kill someone. And also that she was going to sell Leafy off at the earliest opportunity, at about the age of 1 month. So Nanny takes off into a swamp where there are jaguars or some kind of carnivorous animal, water moccasins, things like that, and she hides in the swamp for, it's not specified, but it implies sort of weeks, possibly months, until she hears the Union cannons firing, and then she goes and approaches the Union soldiers. And then once again, now she renews her dreams of independence, not for herself, but for her child. However, what happens, they move to Florida, and Leafy is raped by her school teacher. And that is how Janie is conceived. And Leafy goes off and lives sort of a wild life after that and doesn't really have any contact with Janie. So in other words, Janie is the product of two generations of rape, of having choices deprived of two prior generations of women leading up. So Nanny has invested in Janie all of her hopes and dreams for living an independent life, for living a happy life.
Well, okay, so because I didn't think that she so much wanted Janie to be happy as kind of not miserable, and so and there's a
subtle but
significant
important
difference.
distinction. Yeah, right.
And so so one of the big things that happens is as Janie's growing up, this boy comes while she's on the farm, like she's under a tree, and it's actually a really beautiful passage where she's under a tree and the bees are buzzing above, and the
Right.
spring is springing, and this boy comes by and she kisses him over the fence, and the grandmother finds out about it, and it kind of it prompts her grandmother to push her into this relationship with this much older man,
Right.
because she doesn't want Janie to get hurt really by the world. That's one thing that seems to be happening. But then another thing is the grandmother makes it very clear that Janie doesn't have a lot of power in the world. She tells Janie
Exactly.
that she has to understand that the white man is on top, and the white man hands off his work to the black man, and the black man hands it off to the black women.
Right. And there's a beautiful phrase that she says that black women are the mules of the world.
And I think that really affects Janie for a really, obviously it affects Janie for a really long time. And that's something that plays a big theme, that plays a big part in her life, and how, so it plays a big part in her life. And it just a moment, we're having some technical difficulties.
Microphone problems here. Sorry.
There we go.
All
But
right.
it plays a big part in her life, and it comes back in the end when she's finally kind of figured it out, because she's trying to figure out life on her own and trying to figure out her own
And
happiness.
she has this idea that love comes with marriage, that after you're married, then you will be in love and you'll discover what love is.
Yeah.
And she's quickly disabused of that notion after she marries her first husband, who...
Yeah.
And her first husband wasn't a violent person by any means, and she would come to know violence later in her life. But she was kind of repulsed by him. She didn't like she describes his toenails as being like mule feet, that he wouldn't wash his feet, that he expected all of this labor from her, effectively.
Mm-hmm. And he's much older than her too.
Right,
That's one
right.
thing that he's not. It's not like he was some hottie walking down the street. It's just some guy that her grandmother.
Yeah, but the
met.
hottie walking down the street, it would come soon enough.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to point out that once she leaves her first husband, we never hear about him again. Like,
Right, right.
It's just like she ran off and that was it.
But
And
Nanny saw that as a good opportunity for her because he owned 60 acres of land, he owned a house, et cetera, and so he was considered quite well off by Nanny's standards, and therefore a good partner for Janie.
yeah, and she leaves him for a man who at the time doesn't really have anything. Her second husband.
Yeah, he claims to have $300 in his pocket, but he's dressed nicely and he's good looking and he has a way with people. He's very charismatic, and so they go to the town of Eatonville, which is actually the real town where Zora Neale Hurston grew up. She moved there when she was 3, and it was one of the first all-black towns to be incorporated in America. So go ahead. Let's learn a little bit more about her second husband.
So the thing with her second husband, like you said, he's very charismatic. But there's a problem with charismatic people sometimes, and that is that they don't like to let other people talk as much. So he's...
Is that a dig?
No. What? I feel like that
It
was...
was kind of flattering. Thank you. I'm charismatic. No, I'm sorry. I cut you off. I didn't let you talk. Go ahead. No, go on.
So he shows up at this town, and it's not much of a town at the time that
Right.
he shows up. And he's like, do you have a mayor? Do you have... And everyone's like, no, we don't have a problem with not having a mayor. Really, they didn't seem to... They were just like, this is where we live, and that's cool.
Right.
And
For
we're
those
okay
of you
with it.
keeping track at home, that's a clue for when we get to the politics section of Zora Neale Hurston.
Yes.
So yeah, they were functioning quite independently without any sort of overarching governmental structure.
And he comes in and he wants to set up... He makes this big speech. And it's right at the end of the speech, because Janie's thinking like, oh, I met this guy and we're equals. But right at the end of the speech, she steps forward to speak and he doesn't really let her.
Right.
And it's really an important moment because that defines their relationship, that he doesn't let her talk at all. She works in, so it becomes kind of like, I mean, her first marriage was a lot of labor without any affection. And in her second marriage, she doesn't have to work as hard. She works in a store, the store / post office that he puts up, which is a big deal. But she's not allowed to really participate. She's always like the mayor's wife. She's not allowed to participate in the world.
And he has something to say. He voices his opinion on even on things that she wears, that he criticizes what she wears, whom she speaks to, etc.
She has to keep her hair long, which is just, yeah. And so when he's dying, I mean, it's basically like being chained up without being, she doesn't know who she is. She lives with him. And I think they're like married for 20 years or something. It's a very long time that she's with him. But she's
Is
still,
it that long?
It's quite a while. Because
because the novel ends when she's in her 40s.
Yeah, she's with him. I believe so. She's with him for quite a while.
Right.
And then when he dies, he does die and they're kind of living they're living in the same house, but he's in the main level of the house and she lives upstairs and he has a room on the main level of the house, to be clear. And when he's dying, she comes in and he's talking about how he loves her. And she's like, you don't love me because you don't know who I am.
Right.
You never let me talk. You never let me do anything. We're like strangers living together. You don't know who I am. So that's her second marriage.
That is.
And that blows.
But her third marriage is spectacular.
I don't think they're not married.
Oh, I'm sorry. Her third man, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Is spectacular.
Which is fine. If her first husband is still around kicking, then
right,
she's picking
exactly.
this
But
anyway.
that's kind of the idea that and that's one of the ways that she is controversial, is that she kind of dismisses this whole moral notion that she needs to formally end one relationship and before she goes on to another relationship. And this is, so she goes off with this other guy, the third guy, who is much younger than she is.
Tea cake.
Right. And actually, did you know that Zora Neale Hurston had her second husband was 25 years her junior?
Well, maybe she's onto something.
There you go.
But that would be like, yeah.
And that marriage only lasted 7 months.
Okay, never mind. She's not on to anything. Maybe she's not on to anything.
So she goes up, and this guy, I forget what his real name is, but he's always referred to as Tea Cake.
Yeah, I don't think they ever mention his real name, do they?
I don't know. I think maybe it's on Wikipedia. Maybe someone can Wikipedia that and email it to us. Or Google it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Tea Cake is who we're talking about. And tell us about him.
So Tea Cake is much younger than she is. And the first thing, everyone's off. Everyone in town is off at a thing. And I can't remember what it is, but it's some kind of celebration. And Janie has decided not to go. She's in the store and she's just hanging out. And Tea Cake comes in. And one of the big things with her ex-husband, her dead husband, is that when they would play checkers at night. Like the people in the town would come by and play checkers at the store, and no one ever let her play.
Right,
and he would actually tell her to go and work in the store, like when she wanted to talk.
Right, she wasn't part of the cultural life of the town.
And so the first thing with Tea Cake is he comes into the store while everyone's kind of gone, and he's charming, and he wants to play checkers with her because everyone's gone, and it's a very nice moment. She says he set it up and began to show her, and she found herself glowing inside. Somebody wanted her to play. Somebody thought it natural for her to play. That was even nice. So just the fact that he's kind of including her in this tiny thing, playing checkers. It seems so simple to all of us. Like we've all played checkers, really, but it's just that kind of inclusion, that thinking kind of that she's capable, believing that she's capable of something. And
right, she's worthy of being something more than a possession.
Yeah.
Which is what she is up to that point.
Yeah, I think that's something that really defines tea cake and really how she views him. And then, I mean, wait, do they get married? I think they do get married. I'm trying to remember now. And I've read it.
Remember?
Yeah. And it's not like I haven't read it. Like I've read it quite a few times, but for some reason, because I think he runs off during their honeymoon. And also I think it should be noted that I don't think there's any like formal kind of marriage thing. This isn't like, oh, we're going to go down to the courthouse and get a marriage certificate. I think it's just that they decide. So they've decided to be in a relationship, and they go off to another town on a honeymoon-esque type trip. They're on like a trip, a honeymoon-esque type trip, and he finds some money that she has hidden away, and he goes off for like 3 days, and she has no idea where he is. He's got all her money. She's kind of destitute, but he comes back, and he's like, I'm really sorry, and I wished you were there the whole time. Like he like throws a huge
Becca,
party.
would you buy that? Would you accept that as an excuse?
No,
I don't think
would
so.
be so upset.
But she does, though.
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know. I think like part of it is that they're equal on a lot of levels, and I think too, she's making that choice. She's making the choice as to who she wants to be with, as opposed to somebody else making a choice that they want to be with her.
Right.
So she gets to decide. And it comes up later too, because when they're living in the Everglades, they go off to the Everglades together so they can be bean farmers.
Right.
And it's supposed to be. She talks a lot about how they're equals. They're equals in the bean farming, and they work together, and they work in the fields. Even though she doesn't really have to work, sometimes she's at home, but she comes out every once in a while and works. But one of the things that comes up is that some of the men do beat their wives, and so Tea Cake knocks her around a bit. Just
for form's sake.
Yeah. And it's a very weird thing to read, because you would be like, I mean, like now it's horrifying to think like you're just beating your wife because everyone else is. That's like the worst possible. Like it's bad to beat your wife, but it's like the terrifying that you're doing it just to like fit in with the crowd.
So what do you think it means? So after she shoots him, after she shoots Tea Cake after the terrible hurricane.
Oh, yeah.
And she gets off. Now, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the jury is white, is it not? It's a
at the time that's how everything worked. But she shoots Tea Cake and she gets off. And okay, because I know that we have varying opinions on this, because you think it's like a journey to her strength, and I'm like, oh, it's the power of love. But this is
right.
This is a callback to like when she's talking with her grandmother early. Like we talked about how the grandmother told her black women are the mules of the earth, and she's like the white. But right when she gets out of the courtroom, there are a bunch of women sitting around. They're like, the only people who get away with murder are white men and black women, and they're kind of upset that she got off so easily. But it was self-defense. It really was.
Obviously, yeah.
But yeah, I think it's power of love.
So this is why I disagree. I don't think it's the power of love. It's the power of. So one of the themes that comes out again and again and again in the book is that Janie really regards herself as being part of nature, part of creation. It starts off as an adolescent when she sees a bee pollinating a flower. I think that's how it goes. Mm-hmm. And she sees a bee pollinating a flower, and there's all this innuendo that takes place about nature and sex and love. And
she might have been masturbating in a field.
Yeah, it's actually implied that she was.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to say that, but that's
what happened.
True. So in any case, because bees and flowers are so hot. In any case, so she sees herself very much as part of nature, and so this is sort of vindication in the end that, look, everything worked out at the end. And she has passages where she talks about, I can't find it right now. Anyway, but she talks about how she just goes with the flow and everything will work out for her eventually with her making her choice.
Yeah.
That's it.
The one that really sticks out to me is like right at the very end when she's talking to her friend Phoebe, and she's like, it's a known fact, Phoebe. You got to go there to know there. Your papa and your mama and nobody else can't tell you and show you two things everybody's got to do for themselves. They got to go to God, and they got to find out about living for themselves. And I think that's really the moment where she kind of breaks off. I mean, she's obviously broken away from what her grandmother has told her.
Right.
Because her grandmother's ideals kind of dominated her life. And for a long time, she let other people dominate what her life was going to be about. And now she's going to live in her little town in Florida. And
She lives on her own terms. She makes her own decisions about how she wants to live her life. And she's vindicated in the end.
yeah, because of love. Because if she hadn't fallen into such a powerful love,
Yeah, that's
It's
true.
really
I
like-
mean, it is,
it's-
but it is her search for love, right?
Yeah, I mean,
look,
that's like
I
the
get
thing.
that. I get that. But I think thematically, what's lying at the root of that is the independence. But I understand what she's looking for is the love.
yeah.
Fine, fair enough. I'll concede that point.
Okay.
But let's talk a little bit about the context of the book. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think
So,
yeah, let's definitely do that because I think that's really where we're going to find out about this.
so look, I have to
Love
say,
issue.
so Zora Neale Hurston was essentially written out of literary history
Yep.
for more than 30 years until the early 1970s when Alice Walker and another literary scholar had discovered Their Eyes Were Watching God and set off to find her grave. And it turns out that they had done their research, and Zora Neale Hurston, at the end of her career, had fallen on very, very hard times, was put in sort of a charity welfare home where she had a stroke and she died. This was in 1960. And so for 13 years, she was buried in an anonymous pauper's grave, essentially, until Alice Walker and someone else, I'll find the notes because it's unfair of me not to know her name too, found her grave, or what they thought was her grave, and marked it as such.
Yeah. And the story was unpublished, and the story was unnoticed, and there's a lot of
It
politics.
existed. It had been published. The first
Yeah.
edition had been published, but then it was, as soon as that first, it didn't sell well. As soon as that first edition ran out, it just disappeared.
Yeah, and it's it kind of plays into her politics.
It does
and
play
kinda,
into
it
her.
definitely plays into. So she worked on a play with Langston Hughes, I think called the Mule, maybe, or the Muse, but I guess I should have looked that up and really paid attention. I think it's called.
That's okay. But she worked on a play with Langston Hughes, but it was
And
never
then-
finished.
No, they
because-
got to an argument,
Right,
And then
no doubt a political argument.
they started really this big falling out, and she was kind of different from the other writers of her time.
Right. So a lot of, as we were talking about before, the Harlem Renaissance was there were a lot of factions within it. And Zora Neale Hurston and a couple of other writers decided that we don't want to we don't want to have to dress like white people. We don't want to adopt their manners so as to appeal to white people. We want to be natural and appeal. We want to discuss African American culture as it exists, not as the others in our community would like it to be seen by the outside. And this was quite controversial, but she and a couple of other writers they started a magazine that it was called Fire, with an exclamation, actually 2 exclamation marks. It was Fire with 2 exclamation marks.
It's really a lot of excitement there.
That's very emphatic.
Yes.
And they dealt with issues of prostitution, homosexuality, and the Harlem Renaissance literary establishment was outraged by the publication of this. They thought that it portrayed them very poorly. And I'm not accusing anyone of anything here, but the headquarters of the magazine did burn down after their first issue. I'm just throwing
Was it
that
a
out there.
fire or
It was a fire.
with 2 exclamation points
With
or just 1?
Yes. With 2 exclamation mark fire. And so the magazine ceased to exist. Zora Neale Hurston went off. Now, here's an interesting thing. So key figures in the Harlem Renaissance openly were not merely, say, socialists, but openly identified with the Communist Party. Is that true?
Yeah.
I feel like
if
Joe,
you read,
Joe McCarthy over here. Sorry.
it's fine. If you read Native Son by
Right.
Richard Wright, that book, I mean, it does talk about like the commodification of Black people slightly, but it's really like the communists come in the end and swoop in and try and save them because they're good people. And they believe in equality between the races. But if you look at communism as kind of a solution because of its equality of everyone, Zora Neale Hurston definitely wasn't a communist. She was more of a Republican. And,
That's right.
And that's why when they go to the town and everyone's like, we don't really need a mayor. I mean, that's what's boiling down to, this individual liberty sort of thing.
Right. Well, and so it needs to be said. It needs to be put in, I think, into the context of the time. That in the 1930s, the Democrats were, at that point, the party of the Ku Klux Klan. Okay. And the Republicans, Zora Neale Hurston's brand of republicanism was closer to what we would today call libertarianism, and sort of typical of libertarians. She would swing wildly from the left and the right depending on the issue. For example, she was opposed to Roosevelt's New Deal because she thought that it was oppressive and violated her ideals of liberty. She was against, even in the 1950s, Brown versus Board of Education, which ruled that separate but equal was not allowable. And her reasoning for that was not that she favored segregation, but she thought that the federal government coming in would destroy this rich African-American set of schools that existed in the South, that by forcing integration, that they would be pushing out the black students from being able to study their own culture, their own art, et cetera, as they were being taught in the exclusively black schools of the South. So, but of course, that's an incredibly difficult position to maintain, to be against Brown versus Board of Ed. I mean,
yes.
That's, she's essentially taking the same side as the Strom Thurmonds of the world at that point for obviously different reasons. Now, on the flip side, she also was opposed to any sort of foreign interventionism. She called Truman, after he dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, she called him the butcher of Asia. She had a lot to say about entry into World War II, and in that way is much more akin to the libertarians, the sort of Ron Pauls of today than any traditional Republicans. She ain't no Newt Gingrich, in other words.
No, and that's kind of a difficult thing to take from the establishment and from the publishing world. Even today, I'd say. I don't know. We posted on our Facebook page, and I don't know if you've seen this. The Guardian just today released. They featured a story on how they found in the UK that writers of color were expected to kind of write to their culture in even like a stereotypical way that was kind of, I mean, it's kind of offensive.
Right.
Like, that's how you get into the establishment. That's how you get into the publishing establishment, which very much is still dominated by white male voices.
Right.
The way to get in is to like tell, I mean, like the way I think about it, it's nonsense stories, because to me, as a woman of color, it's not like I'm wandering around all day. Like, when I read stories by other Latino women, I'm like, this is nothing remotely even similar to my life. And so in a certain way, like, if that's what sells, and that's what they want from me.
So if you were going to write a book, it would be, you'd have to be in their very specific way of being a Latina, right?
Yeah, like I would definitely have to like include a lot of magical realism, totally write about the Cuban Revolution.
Right. Oh, that's right. We were having coffee on Saturday. We were talking about this.
Yeah. I spend a lot of time in the kitchen because women of color are always in the kitchen, like
making things with spices.
Yeah,
right.
Because that's really awesome. And it's just that's the problem is that I could probably write that story, but it's just not true to my own life. So
no,
you're getting this really kind of fake literature. I don't know.
It's a fake form of inclusion, really.
Yeah.
You're saying, don't tell your own story. Tell the story that we want to hear about that, right? So, and I mean, look, this issue has been beaten to death for at least 2 generations of literary scholarship. So I hesitate to even say the word. But I hate it. The otherness.
Yes.
Okay. So it's still very much a thing. It's still very much alive. And I find it very ironic. I have to say this. So, my book is about a 17-year-old girl, right?
Yeah.
You know how many people called me on my crap and said, you're a white male. How can you write about a 17-year-old girl? Exactly one critic said, I don't think it's appropriate for you to be writing as a 17-year-old girl. So in other words, white guys can get away with writing whatever they want. You know,
no one's like, you need to write more stories about like how connected you feel to your German grandmother while you guys cook bratwurst.
Right.
And
in the suburbs of Minnesota. Right?
Yeah, like no one's saying stuff like that.
No,
But it's something very much when you're a writer of color that they kind of want you to do this. And I think what's so interesting about Their Eyes Were Watching God versus, say, Native Son. Native Son is very much about being black. Like it's very much, that's what the book is. It's about being black. And it speaks a bit to this experience. And I did find when I read it, I wasn't like, oh, this is a book that's so black and I just can't relate. Because that's something that critics like to say nowadays about books by people of color. I just can't relate to a black character.
Is that right?
Like, yeah, that's
Who
like
says
a
that?
big thing. Like, I don't know. It's
a
a
thing
thing.
you've seen.
That's a thing we've seen. And that's a pretty common thread. But Native Son, I could definitely relate to Bigger on some level, and I could relate to a lot of the characters, and I understood where it was coming from. But with Their Eyes Were Watching God, it's not about Janie. Like, if Janie were white, the story would be, obviously the part in the beginning with the grandmother limiting her, it would have to happen in a different way, but finding love and finding this experience. Like, she's telling, Zora Neale Hurston is telling a human story. She's not telling a black story. And I think that's
she's
one of the things. She's
specifically telling Janie's story.
Yeah.
You know, and this is Janie's way of going about life. And the fact that it's not didactic the way that a lot of the establishment within the Harlem Renaissance wanted their literature to be really was quite controversial. One of the things that they criticized her on is, and when you read this book, you'll see this firsthand, but all of the dialogue is written in the African-American vernacular of the South, right? And so like I am is spelled A-H-M, et cetera. And she was heavily criticized for this. And they say that this was this mawkish portrayal of African Americans as being uneducated, when anything could be that is so far from the truth. When you read the dialogue, it's so eloquent, and they thought that this portrayed African Americans as being low somehow. When Zora Neale Hurston, true to her anthropology background, wanted to portray it accurately, and in fact, she finds it quite ennobling, this manner of speech. She finds absolutely nothing wrong with it.
Okay.
Right?
Am
I right?
I mean, they know that's like it's very interesting, and one thing that I noticed too when I was reading it, that they go into this dialect, but it's obvious that Zora Neale Hurston can speak proper English and can write in proper English. So to me, that's a silly argument to say that you don't like that. To me, when I read it, I'm just thinking, okay, this is just how people talk. And I didn't think they were stupid for talking that way.
No, but that's what the establishment said
well, I
at the
can see
time.
that. And
I'm not
so
saying that.
I think the establishment was wrong.
Right. I mean, that's what Richard Wright.
There you go, Richard Wright. You're wrong.
There you go. Langston Hughes, take that.
Yeah.
So, but this book, since it's been rediscovered, it became sort of one of the superstar books, went from complete obscurity to being an absolute superstar
because it's about
overnight.
Humanity.
Well,
it's about
right,
humanity.
right. But so it's been analyzed to death by all of these, academic, literary criticism people. They've written 10 million papers on it to fill a small library. And in my view, none of that really matters. I mean, maybe they have a point to it, maybe they don't. The point is that this is an enjoyable book, and it's one of the first portrayals that we really see, at least in 20th century literature, of a really strong female protagonist. So Katniss Everdeen and Triss or whatever from Divergent, they can thank Zora Neale Hurston for pioneering the strong female hero.
I don't think they're strong. I don't think they qualify. I don't like Katniss very much, and I don't want to get into a discussion or debate about the Hunger Games while talking about.
We're going to do that in another episode. We've been arguing about this for a while.
I just
that we
really
need to
don't
have
like
a YA
those
episode.
characters.
Fair enough. All I'm saying is strong female leads.
No, this is a very strong character.
Janie, start of that lineage right there.
And it's a strong female character. it's a strong woman of color too, and that's kind of a big deal at the time because another book that came out around 1937 was Gone with the Wind, which contained Mammy, who kind of
Right, exactly.
you know,
Sort of the opposite.
yeah, she's kind of like hanging out by Scarlet, and it's not really, she's not, I mean, she's strong in a certain way, but she's not like the star of the show, or like, who's the other one? The one, Prissy.
Right.
Oh my God. Talk about a terrible character. And this is coming out like right before Their Eyes Were Coming Out is coming out.
Let me ask you this, because I've always known you as a strong feminist. What do you think about this book as feminist literature?
I mean, Janie coming to her journey is really, really amazing. The relationship with Tea Cake is kind of screwed up in some ways.
Sure.
But I mean, I guess I can see it as like a positive that she is making that choice, but
I don't know. You're speechless.
Yeah. I
all of a
don't
sudden.
really know what to say about it as a feminist book. I think too, one thing that's really important to talk during this time, women got the right to vote in the 1920s. In 1920. And when I say women got the right to vote, women who worked, we're talking about white women, because they actually excluded black women from their marches. They would, there was like a whole lot of controversy at this one march in New York City where they were going to have the biggest march ever. And there were these groups of African-American women who were like, oh yeah, we're going to march too. And the Southern white women were like, we're not marching if they're marching. And so they had one of those little talks and decided it would be for the best if the black women just sat in the back and didn't, just.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow,
and so they kind of said they weren't going to participate. And as a result, there were, 40 more years of Jim Crow. So black women weren't able to vote.
Right. Right.
So black women kind of, when you're part of, this is why intersectionality within feminism is so important, because there were a lot of things that women were not allowed to do, but there were a lot of things that black women were allowed to do within a community that was really interesting. So in 1917, there was a girl who struck out Babe Ruth and I believe Lou Gehrig as well. She was signed to the Yankees. And then the next day,
Seriously?
I'm serious. This is a true story. And the next day, Major League Baseball was like, oh, no, women can't play baseball. And then.
Wow. That is fascinating. I'm going to look that up.
This is something that's really interesting because, of course, you've seen the movie A League of Their Own, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's this one like really dramatic scene where the baseball goes off into the distance and like there's this black woman standing there and she throws it back, but she throws it so far, like she throws it all the way to the catcher and the catcher's hand is hurt. And everyone's like sad because, oh, she can't play in the leagues. Well, she doesn't give a shit because black women played in the Negro Leagues. There were 3 African-American women playing in the Negro Leagues. They played against Satchel Paige. They played against Josh Gibson. I mean, they're really amazing baseball players playing in the Negro Leagues, women. And so it's kind of this interesting thing. I think black women often have to be stronger than, or women of color just in general have to be stronger than people think they are, because there's this idea of women in general as the wilting flower without realizing that when you're oppressing someone on 2 levels, as a woman and as a person of color, they're going to like be working twice as hard to. So it's this different kind of strength that's really powerful. So I think that Janie is a strong character, but I don't think she's unique within a history.
Not unique within a history, but I think unique within the literature of the Harlem Renaissance,
literature,
certainly.
Yeah.
And unique among 20th century American writers at the very least, especially so early on. I just have to say again, for the record, that this book, a lot of literature, it can be a real slog. It's difficult to read. You have to work at it. This book, it's enjoyable from start to finish. It is. If you're an academic and you want to analyze the hell out of it, be my guest. But if you just are looking for a good story that is gorgeously written, this book is it.
Is a Sunday read for me. I have some books that I have this thing. I do my laundry on Sunday, so I'll sit down with a book and read a book on Sunday. That's a thing, like just one book, and this book I can get through in a Sunday. And it's not because it's like super easy, but because it's just so much fun to read. It's a really great book
It's a real
to read.
pleasure.
And that one's yeah, I like it a lot. Really excited about that.
Well, very good.
Okay.
I
so that is our
Show for this week.
yeah. So let's talk. Okay. So next week we're doing the Monkey Wrench Gang, which is
Wow.
exciting. And it's next. So next week is Earth Day. And that's why we're doing the Monkey Wrench Gang.
Fascinating.
yeah.
Is the Monkey Wrench Gang, are they
They're
eco-terrorists?
eco-terrorists, kind of.
That was great.
Yeah,
See that
jinx.
synchronicity there.
So they're eco-terrorists, and that's what we're talking about next week. And just a reminder that you can like us on Facebook. And right now we're doing a contest where, like, if you comment on a photo, it's a really easy contest. If you comment on a photo,
There's no math.
yeah, it's basically
Right.
we're going to pick a random number at the end. But if you comment on a photo, if you like our Facebook page and comment on a photo, you can win the Penguin English Library versions of basically our Bronte run, Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, and Tenant of Wildfell Hall. So that's exciting. Isn't that exciting?
That is very exciting.
You could just win 3 whole books.
3 whole books. No,
Whoa.
that's something, though. That's
And
wonderful.
also, we are, I mean, you can write to us at bibliophiliapodcast@gmail.com. And we're looking for sponsors. So if you want to sponsor the show, write to bibliophiliapodcast@gmail.com. If you don't want to sponsor the show, but just want to send us random money, you can send it to bibliophiliapodcast@gmail.com on PayPal. And we're not going to
Cash,
object.
check, whatever.
We're not going to be upset. We also
So-
have a Patreon account. So
Yeah, the Patreon is huge, actually. I got to say that this show, I think it's fair to say that it has exceeded, in terms of its popularity, it has exceeded all of your expectations. Is that fair to say, Becca?
yeah, I mean, I'm happy with where we're at, and I'm happy. That sounded so lame.
Oh, that was terrible.
I'm so happy with. No, I'm actually really happy. I'm really
okay.
excited that
Hey, reader, or, hey, listeners, thanks, I guess. That's what Becca's saying. No,
we're
she's
getting
not.
a lot of positive feedback, and if you listen and you do like it, just be sure to write a review on iTunes as well. But we are
Reviews,
getting
very helpful.
a lot of positive feedback, and we are getting a lot of listeners, and that does mean a lot. So
Huge numbers of listeners, and it's extremely thrilling. I
it
think.
is
So
because people are interested in
know.
books.
Becca is killing it with the Bibliophilia podcast.
Yeah.
Bam! Thank you very
I
much.
don't know. Okay, but yeah, go to our Patreon and give us money for sponsorships, and we'll mention your name or something. And that's all really well. So, yeah. Oh, well, you're going to be back in 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, what are we doing?
I have no idea.
All right, we'll figure out a great book.
We pick something, and then we pick 3 others.
That's right.
That's
No,
right.
we picked a fantastic book, much more contemporary than anything we've done so far, and it is going to be amazing. That's right, because we talked about it.
Yeah,
before
but
the
I
show.
can't remember which one we finally decided to do.
Yeah,
Okay.
Ready Player One.
Okay, so then we're doing Ready Player One because we were thinking maybe we'll do Never Let Me Go.
Oh no, it's Ready Player One.
Okay, so we're gonna do Never. Okay, so we're doing Monkey Wrench Gang next week, and then Ready Player One, and
That's
then
right.
A High Wind in Jamaica. So
Nice. All right.
yep. All right. So Becca out. That's not okay. Let's never do that again. Never doing that again.
You are so red. I think we got kind of bogged down there in the middle somewhere.
Did you do?
Yeah.
Well, I think what happened was okay. So because we were going through the plot, and then next time I'm gonna definitely
Then I thought that we were but then I thought that we were going through the plot again. You know?
Yeah.
And that's why I kind of so anyway, then TK gets shot.
That's
pretty awesome.
But yeah.
That was great. I have to say, it was very. So the thing is,